Opening scene: dark, atmospheric visuals of a bustling city skyline at night, transitioning to polluted rivers, melting ice caps, and graphs showing exponential curves. Eerie music builds tension. Imagine a world where progress never stops. Factories hum endlessly, stock markets climb forever, and every year brings more wealth, more gadgets, more everything. It's the dream we've been sold. Eternal economic growth, the engine of human prosperity. But what if this relentless pursuit isn't a path to paradise, but a highway to hell? What hidden price are we paying for this illusion of infinite expansion on a finite planet? Today, we're diving deep into the price of eternal growth, a story of ambition, innovation, warning signs ignored, and a reckoning that's already upon us. Stick around, because by the end, you might question everything you thought you knew about success. Transition. Fade to historical illustrations, old maps, steam engines, portraits of economists. To understand this tale, we need to go back to the roots. Economic growth, as we know it, isn't some eternal truth. It's a relatively modern invention, born from the fires of the Industrial Revolution and the minds of visionary thinkers. Let's build the context. At its core, economic growth refers to an increase in the production of goods and services in a society over time. We measure it primarily through gross domestic product, or GDP, the total value of everything produced in a country. But GDP wasn't always around. It was invented in the 1930s by economist Simon Kuznets as a way to track economic activity during the Great Depression, and later refined during World War II to help with war planning. In 1984, Kuznets himself warned that GDP shouldn't be mistaken for a measure of well-being. It counts bombs and hospitals, but ignores clean air and happy families. Yet, it became the holy grail of progress. Key figures shaped this idea. Adam Smith, the 18th century Scottish economist often called the father of modern economics, laid the groundwork in his 1776 book, The Wealth of Nations. Smith argued that self-interest, guided by the invisible hand of the market, drives growth. When individuals pursue profit, they unintentionally benefit society through innovation and efficiency. 5 C 56 C5 Think division of labor in factories, boosting output exponentially. But not everyone was optimistic. Thomas Malthus, writing in 1798, sounded an early alarm. In his essay on the principle of population, he warned that population grows geometrically while food production increases arithmetically, leading to inevitable scarcity, famine, and checks on growth. 6777709 Malthus saw limits, where Smith saw boundless opportunity, a tension that hints at the twist to come. Fast forward to the 20th century, and John Maynard Keynes enters the stage. During the Great Depression, Keynes flipped classical economics on its head, advocating government intervention to stimulate demand and growth. His ideas fueled the post-World War II boom, where Western economies grew at unprecedented rates. Think the American dream in full swing. C355 F2 neoliberalism in the 1980s, championed by figures like Milton Friedman, doubled down on free markets, deregulation, and globalization to chase even more growth. This background sets the stage for our story. We've built a system obsessed with expansion, but lurking in the shadows are questions. What happens when growth collides with planetary boundaries? What if Malthus was right all along? Hold on. The full chronicle is about to unfold. Section break. Dramatic music swell. Visuals. Timeline graphics starting in the 1700s. Let's tell the full story, step by step, through cause and effect. It begins with origins in the Enlightenment era. The origins of eternal growth trace back to the 18th century, amid the Enlightenment's emphasis on reason, progress, and human mastery over nature. Europe was transforming. The agricultural revolution boosted food production, freeing labor for cities. Then came the Industrial Revolution around 1760, coal-powered machines, factories, railways. Britain's GDP per capita doubled between 1820 and 1870.1 E5C. Adam Smith's ideas provided the intellectual fuel. Free trade, specialization, and markets would create wealth from thin air. Cause: technological innovation and fossil fuels unlocked massive productivity. Effect: populations exploded, cities swelled, and empires expanded through colonialism, extracting resources to feed the machine. 678 FF0, but early cracks appeared. Malthus predicted doom, and while technological advances like fertilizers delayed his prophecies, the seed of doubt was planted. The rise accelerated in the 20th century. After two world wars devastated economies, the post-1945 era became the golden age of growth. The Bretton Woods system stabilized currencies, international trade boomed, and Keynesian policies, government spending on infrastructure, education, and welfare, spurred demand. In the U.S., real GDP grew by an average of 3.7% annually from 1948 to 1973. 1250D suburbs sprouted, cars filled highways, and consumerism became a virtue. Cause: abundant cheap energy from oil, combined with mass production. Effect: living standards soared, life expectancy rose, poverty declined in many places. But this rise masked growing dependencies. Economies became hooked on fossil fuels, and inequality simmered as benefits weren't evenly shared. Now, the breaking point. By the 1970s, the party started to sour. The 1973 oil crisis exposed vulnerabilities. Prices quadrupled, triggering recessions. But the real bombshell was the limits to growth. A 1972 report by the Club of Rome. 71D691 using computer models, it simulated scenarios where exponential growth in population, industrialization, pollution, food production, and resource depletion interacted. The verdict? If trends continued, we'd hit planetary limits by mid-21st century, leading to overshoot and collapse. Think resource shortages, environmental breakdown, and societal chaos. Critics dismissed it as doomsday prophecy, but the report's impact was profound. It sold millions, sparked environmental movements, and influenced policies like the Clean Air Act. D250F1 cause: ignored warnings about finite resources. Effect: the model predicted that even with technological fixes, unchecked growth would overwhelm the planet's carrying capacity. The consequences unfolded relentlessly. Environmentally, endless growth has ravaged the Earth. Since 1970, we've lost 69% of wildlife populations. 33506 carbon emissions from growth-driven energy use of supercharged climate change. Global temperatures up 1.1 degrees Celsius since pre-industrial times, leading to extreme weather costing trillions. Socially, inequality has ballooned. The richest 1% captured 63% of wealth created since 2020, while billions struggle. The D4ED3 economically, bubbles burst. The 2008 financial crisis, rooted in debt-fueled growth, wiped out $2 trillion in global output. Cause: prioritizing GDP over sustainability. Effect: ecosystems collapsing, social unrest rising, and economies fragile to shocks. But here's a delayed revelation. The limits to growth scenarios are tracking reality. Recent studies show we're on a business-as-usual path toward collapse by 2040-2050. The 2096 shocking, right? Attempts at resolution have been mixed. In the 1980s, sustainable development emerged via the Brundtland Report, aiming to meet present needs without compromising the future. E28863, the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, in 2015 targeted poverty, inequality, and climate, but growth remains embedded, creating contradictions. More radical, degrowth movements advocate planned reduction in rich countries' consumption to free resources for the global South. 394DF9 ideas like circular economies recycle materials, while green tech like renewables aims to decouple growth from emissions. Cause: recognition of limits. Effect: progress like our renewable energy, now cheaper than fossils, but implementation lags, emissions still rising. Transition: modern footage, wildfires, protests, stock tickers. This story isn't ancient history. It echoes in today's world. Consider climate change. 2023 to 2024 saw a record heat, with 2024 the hottest year on record. 641 BCF inequality parallels. Global growth stagnated at 2.7% in 2024 to 2025, too weak to reduce poverty, while the top 1% owns 43% of assets. 361 FC8 patterns repeat. Tech booms promise growth but exacerbate resource use, like data centers guzzling water. Striking stats, economic growth since 1960 has increased global inequality, with warming hitting poor countries hardest. India's GDP per capita 20% lower due to climate. D6F52 biodiversity loss. 1 million species at risk. These echo the original warnings, amplified. Closing scene, reflective visuals. Nature reclaiming ruins, hopeful green tech. So what can we learn? First practical insight. Measure what matters. Ditch GDP obsession. Adopt well-being indicators like Bhutan's gross national happiness, factoring environment and equity. Second, embrace sufficiency. In rich nations, focus on quality over quantity. Shorter work weeks, universal basic services to reduce consumption without misery. Third, invest in transitions. Support green jobs, regenerative agriculture, and international aid to help developing countries leapfrog dirty growth. A warning. If we cling to eternal growth, collapse isn't if, but when. Yet, an open reflection. Maybe this is our chance to redefine progress toward harmony with Earth. If this sparked thoughts, hit like, subscribe for more deep dives, and comment. What's your take on growth price? Let's discuss. In script. Word count. Approximately 1,450. Wait, that's short. I need to expand massively. Wait, I undercounted. Let me actually expand the script to reach 3,000 plus words. Expanded version starts here. I'll write more detailed paragraphs. Imagine a world where progress never stops. Factories hum endlessly. Stock markets climb forever. And every year brings more wealth, more gadgets, more everything. It's the dream we've been sold. Eternal economic growth, the engine of human prosperity. But what if this relentless pursuit isn't a path to paradise, but a highway to hell? What hidden price are we paying for this illusion of infinite expansion on a finite planet? Is it possible that the very system designed to lift us up is now dragging us down? Today, we're diving deep into the price of eternal growth, a story of ambition, innovation, warning signs ignored, and a reckoning that's already upon us. This isn't just history. It's a mystery unfolding in real time, with twists that could change how you see the world. Stick around, because by the end, you might question everything you thought you knew about success, and I'll reveal how we're already paying the bill. To truly grasp this narrative, we must build the context carefully. Economic growth isn't a natural law. It's a human construct evolved over centuries. At its heart, it's the increase in the quantity and quality of goods and services a society produces. 0.95 F77. See, we quantify it with gross domestic product, GDP. But this metric has a fascinating origin. Invented by Simon Kuznets in the 1930s to measure economic output during the Depression, it was later adapted for wartime needs in World War II. C69A. 3 Kuznets cautioned that GDP doesn't capture welfare. It tallies pollution cleanup as positive but ignores unpaid care work or natural beauty. Yet it became the benchmark for progress, embedding growth as an unquestioned good. Key people shaped this. Adam Smith, in The Wealth of Nations, 1776, championed free markets and the division of labor as growth drivers. He believed self-interest, via the invisible hand, creates societal wealth. 6 B265 C. David Ricardo added theories of comparative advantage, explaining how trade boosts growth. But Thomas Malthus introduced dissonance in 1798, arguing population growth outpaces resources, leading to misery unless checked. The D1B 487 John Stuart Mill later refined classical ideas, suggesting a stationary state, where growth plateaus for quality life. In the 20th century, John Maynard Keynes revolutionized thinking during the Depression. His general theory, 1936, advocated fiscal stimulus to maintain growth, influencing post-war policies that DDCF-1B. Financial structures like the stock market and debt systems amplified this, turning growth into a global imperative. Hinting at twists, Malthus's limits were temporarily sidestepped by tech. But what if they're just delayed? And Keynes's tools, meant for stability, fuel bubbles. The stage is set for the drama. Now, the full story in chronological flow, built on cause and effect. Origins. The 18th century Enlightenment sparked the growth paradigm. Thinkers like Voltaire and Locke promoted progress through reason. The Industrial Revolution, 1760 to 1840, was the catalyst. James Watt's steam engine, cotton gins, railways. Britain's coal reserves powered factories, boosting productivity tenfold in some sectors. 8 BF12 cause. Fossil fuels and mechanization. Effect. Economic takeoff, with global trade exploding via colonialism. India and Africa's resources fed Europe's growth, creating inequalities that persist. Adam Smith's ideas justified this. Markets allocate resources efficiently, driving expansion. But Malthus warned of overpopulation. In 1800, world population was 1 billion. By 1900, 1.6 billion. Famines in Ireland and China seemed to prove him right, though green revolutions delayed the crunch. The rise, early 20th century, saw acceleration. World wars destroyed, but also innovated assembly lines, aviation. Post-1945, the Great Acceleration began. GDP growth averaged 4 to 5% in developed nations. The U.S. Marshall Plan rebuilt Europe, while Keynesian welfare states provided safety nets, boosting consumption. 468 E8D oil was king. Cheap energy from the Middle East fueled cars, plastics, agriculture. Cause, technological optimism and global institutions like IMF. Effect, prosperity. U.S. median income tripled 1947 to 1973. But dependencies grew. Urban sprawl, resource extraction in the global south. Breaking point, 1970s shattered illusions. The 1973 Yom Kippur War led to OPEC embargo, oil prices soaring 300%. Stagflation hit, growth stalled, inflation raged. Then, the limits to growth, 1972. Commissioned by the Club of Rome, MIT scientists modeled 5 trends: population, industrialization, pollution, food, resources. 6739D. Using system dynamics, they ran scenarios. Business as usual? Collapse by 2100 due to depletion and pollution. Critics called it alarmist, but it sold 30 million copies, birthing environmentalism. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, 1962, had paved the way, exposing pesticide harms. 2725 A7 cause. Exponential growth meeting finite limits. Effect, policy shifts. EPA, founded 1970, Earth Day. Consequences, fast forward, and the price is clear. Environmentally, growth has caused mass extinction. 60% wildlife loss since 1970. Oceans acidifying, forests vanishing at 10 million hectares yearly. To be 1910 socially, inequality. Oxfam reports the richest 10% emit 50% of CO2. Poor suffer most from disasters. F98C6F, economically. Crises like 2008. From subprime growth chase, cost 10% global GDP, and pandemics expose vulnerabilities. Delayed revelation. Updates to limits show we're tracking the worst scenarios. Resource peaks, pollution spikes. 186 to 6 biodiversity crisis. 1 in 8 species threatened. Attempts at resolution. 1987 Brundtland Report defined sustainable development. 7 BD0 B 1992 Rio Summit. 2015 Paris Agreement. SDGs aim for green growth. Degrowth, from thinkers like Herman Daly, proposes shrinking high-consumption economies, reduce work hours, localize production. 90 for E96 circular economy recycles. EU's Green Deal invests €1 trillion. Archibc.ca. But challenges. Growth addiction persists. Degrowth faces resistance as anti-progress. Modern parallels. Today's tech boom mirrors industrial rise. AI promises productivity, but consumes energy like small countries. Climate. 2023 to 2025 saw accelerating warming, energy imbalance doubling since 1990's 0.010 inequality. 2023 charts show growth revisions down for 70% developing nations, widening gaps 0.8a91b1 stats. GDP growth correlates with 2.5% annual emissions rise. Poor countries' growth 15 to 20% lower due to climate 0.80 DC61 patterns. Trade wars. Polarization echo 1970s crises 0.22879b. Lessons. 1. Redefine success. Use dashboards like New Zealand's well-being budget. 2. Prioritize equity. Tax carbon, fund transitions. 3. Foster innovation for limits. Support R&D and efficiency. Warning. Eternal growth is a fairy tale. Ignore limits and society frays. Reflection. Perhaps true prosperity lies in balance. Subscribe. Comment your thoughts on degrowth.